Good. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Agenda Alexandria. My name is Bob Wood. I'm a past chairman of our Agenda Alexandria board, and on behalf of the board and all our members, I'd like to thank you for being here tonight for, I think, what's going to be a tremendous program. Eileen Rivera has put it together. Our panelists are ready to go. And frankly, it's a great thing to look out in the audience and see so many representative parts of our city of Alexandria. We have a variety of, new school board members, thanks to Heather Thornton. Thank you very much. Let's give her a hand. She's our newly elected school board member. I'll miss a couple, but I do know we have Allison Soberberg with us. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate you being here. We have Jacinta Green, I think, is here. No? Okay, I thought that possibly was going to be here. Tim Levain. Where are you, Tim? All right. Let's give them. All right, let's thank all of our city leaders. Oh, one more. Cheryl, where are you? Thank you so much. Thank you very much for being here. Okay. Margie? Where is she? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here. I was trying to keep Mark Eaton back there. Thank you very much for being here. We are, in fact, having an interesting collection of those interested in the school, those interested in the subject, and those interested in Alexandria. You put all that together, we've got a remarkable program put together for you. We thank you for being here to be part of it, because you're really the important part. Those who have an opportunity to learn more about our city, as we say, we're very proud of discussing the issues without taking sides. That is a fact. This was a suggestion from Bill Ewell that we take aboard this subject. Of course, back in 2014, he helped establish the task force that looked at bullying in our schools. And he made the recommendations, and we were immediately interested in it. Eileen immediately took the challenge. So thanks to all of you for being here. Thanks for our caterer, Randy Peaches of Do Yourself a Flavor. Raise your hand back there. All right. Thank you very much, Randy. We really appreciate it. With soup, gluten-free. Very nice. Thank you very much. We as well want to thank our T.C. Williams Broadcast Club. That's all the folks down here in the corner that make sound happen. They are recording tonight. This is obviously goes up on our YouTube channel. It'll be a very important program, I think, for a lot of us to look back on. We'll have tapes of the program on YouTube after the program concludes. We also have it on our website. And our website we're very proud of. We're very proud of all the work that our team has put together to put that website in order. It is accurate. It's very colorful. It's very right. Take a look at our website. I think you'll enjoy it. You can keep track of the programs as they develop. We are going into a cycle in February. We're going to be putting new programs together, a whole slate of programs that will look at issues in Alexandria. And frankly, it's your recommendations are most important to us. So any of the board members, all board members, let's raise your hand. All right? They're peppered in there. They're all over let's give them a hand. You find one of them and say, here's what I'm interested in, please do that, and we'll take a look at the subject. We're always looking for that input, want to be kind of ready to go in March to start putting that program together. Special thanks to our newest sponsor, Network and Engineering Technologies. Ronald, I saw you here earlier. Ronald Butler. There you are. Stand up, please. Our newest sponsor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We also have a new podcast sponsor available. We're putting our programs on a podcast. Let's see, 4 people in here understand that. But no, that's not true. You understand it, I know. Okay, but the podcast is really a great program. And Michael Pope, who can't be here tonight, he's covering the state legislature and the actions in Richmond. He sends his best to you. But we've really got a great program. Eileen's been involved with it as well. And it puts kind of a deeper dive on the subject. And the podcast is available through our website, the best way to get to it. But we're looking for a sponsor, and your name's all over it. It'll say podcast presented by, but it'll be a deeper dive on the subject that we're dealing with. They're really high quality with a great journalist involved, and that's Michael Pope, and our representatives from the board. Thanks to our sponsors. We've got a number of them here with us. George Para, thank you very much. I saw you over this way. George, where are you? Thank you very much. We've got Alexandria Chamber of Commerce as a sponsor, Janet Barnett, Synergy Home Care. Do Yourself a Flavor, thanks for stepping up for sponsoring. Thanks so much. The Hermitage, let me tell you, the Hermitage, they allow us to use this facility to present these programs to you. We couldn't do it without them. The Hermitage is a great, great supporter of Agenda Alexandria. Hofheimer Security and Captain Token the Magician we have as well. Those are two different companies, Hoftheimer Security and Captain Token the Magician. We have Honest Air. Florence King. Florence is here. Thank you as ever for your sponsorship. Let's give it up for Florence. Thanks so much. I didn't see Gant with us, but Redmond, Peyton, and Braswell are our sponsor and have been for a long time. Renner and Company. John Renner's here. Stand up, John. There you go. Thank you, John. We appreciate it. Our board meetings is in the Renner offices, and we get a free audit for the whole thing. It's really great. We're so happy with that. Simpson Real Estate Services. Ann Wynn's State Farm Agency. Thanks so much. A new sponsor last year. SunTrust Mortgage. T.C. Williams Broadcast Club. Let's have a sponsorship from T.C. Williams. Thanks so much. We have Union Street Pub. We have Jay back there in the back. Union Street Pub. Thank you very much. Virginia Wine Dogs. We know something about that. There you are, right there. Okay. Boyd Walker. Thanks, Boyd, and the Zebra, who gives great coverage to all of our city activities. Thanks for the Zebra for being a sponsor. We thank our board members. This is an active group. They're responsible for the programs. They take charge of a lot of different parts of the moving pieces that go into Agenda Alexandria. We thank them. I'd point out April 10th. April 10th is Spring to Action, a remarkable program the city of Alexandria has where you can call in and make donations, and it goes to an incredible number of worthy causes, including Agenda Alexandria. That's April 10th. Really a tremendous program the city should be very proud of. It helps a lot of people get a lot of good work done. ACPS is our anti-bullying campaign is really what we're talking about. It started in 2014. But the program tonight is about bullying and lockdowns. I don't know whether you knew or not, in January this year, we had 3 lockdowns in Hammond. 3 lockdowns, so that's another important part of what's going on, how it's being handled, and what the city can do with that. We have an incredible panel put together of expertise. We have our very own superintendent. We have people that have been involved in the school system for a very, very long time, and another perspective as we look at folks who've been involved in the ACPS system for a while. Thank you for being here. It's a great joy and honor to bring you this next step, which is a video prepared by the T.C. Williams Club here, and it's on this subject exactly. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you, if you can see the video will now play. Thank you.
Well, I do.
More than 3.2 million students are bullied each year. Most don't say anything out of fear of retaliation and shame. Don't be silent.
Speak up!
Thank you. Well, good evening. Thank you again, Bob, for that great introduction, and thanks for everyone for being here tonight and for the video. We thought it would be a great way to kick off tonight's discussion. And I want to thank everyone again for coming out on a Monday night. I know that tonight was a particularly busy night on the roads with a lot of folks going back to work, thankfully, right? Yes, thank you. Right? I know, it's a good thing, right? So before I get started, I just want to say 2 things. One is that this is the first program of Agenda Alexandria for 2019. So I just want to say a formal Happy New Year to everyone. And then secondly, as Bob mentioned, we are working really hard at extending this program to a different venue, a different format. And I've been working really hard with Michael Pope, as Bob mentioned, on creating a podcast. Just a quick question for those of you in the audience. How many of you actually listen to podcasts? Well, thanks, Ben. Okay, good. So, we just thought that it's hard getting out on a Monday night. I know for myself, I'm a working mom, and it's sometimes hard to get out of the house. And so First of all, thank you again for everyone who came out. So that's why we're working on the podcast, to find another way to reach other audiences. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel. And let me just start off by saying my name is Eileen Cassidy Rivera, and I am very honored to serve on the board of Agenda Alexandria. I just started on the board last summer. And Bill Ewell, who I'm sure a lot of you know, our former mayor, he and I put together tonight's program. Last summer, when, as Bob mentioned, when we got together and started thinking about topics that we thought would be of interest to the community, we thought about how we could really address something that's as important as tonight's program. So I wish Bill could be here. I know he's in our thoughts, and I just wanted to acknowledge him for all of his support and his leadership. And I also just want to acknowledge again the leadership of our former mayor, Allison Silverberg, and all the work she did to further really the agenda that former Mayor Ewell started. And thank you for everything you did, Allison. You did a lot to continue, and we'll talk more about that tonight. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. Dr. Gregory Hutchings, to my immediate right, is the Superintendent of Alexandria City Public Schools. And as many of you know, hopefully, he recently became our superintendent, and he is a graduate of T.C. Williams. He's a product of our city and of our school system. Yep, he left for a little while, and we're so glad to have you back. We were just talking earlier that he was the superintendent in Shaker Heights, a very, very well-known school district that's, I'm sure, in much better place now that you were there. But we're glad to have you back. When I served on the school board back in 06 to 09 with my dear friend Cheryl Gorsuch, I remember working with you. And Dr. Hutchings was the director of K through 12, pre-K through 12 initiatives, and the director of middle school programs. And he has an amazing background. He is a product of Virginia, went to ODU, has a master's in educational leadership from George Mason, and a doctorate in educational policy, planning, and leadership from the College of William and Mary. So let's have a round of applause for Dr. Hutchings. Thank you for being here. To Dr. Hutchings' right is Max Louver, who is a member and former chair of Alexandria Mayor's Campaign to End Bullying, the Bullying Committee. And I know you were very instrumental, Mac, in working with former Mayor Ewell in starting the Anti-Bullying Campaign.
I came along after.
You came along.
I won't take that credit.
And Mac is a native of Macon, Georgia, but he's lived in Alexandria since '87, so he's pretty much an Alexandrian, right? He just retired as well from the city. He was with the Department of Recreation, Parks, and Cultural Activities. He was just retired last year, so he's got a lot of free time on his hands, which is why he's here tonight. He was with 30 years with Alexandria government. Let's give him a round of applause. And Mac has a Bachelor's of Science in Public Recreation from Georgia Southern. All right. He's done a lot for our city. I know a lot of students and children and kids have been affected and have been really well guided, Mac, by your leadership. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay. To Mac's right is Mark Sullivan. Mark is a friend. He is a senior corporate security manager for a Dublin-based pharmaceutical company. I think that company, I don't know exactly the name of it, Mark. Maybe you can share it with us a little bit later. But he is from Buffalo, New York, and it's not too far from where I grew up. I grew up in Rochester, New York, so it's pretty close. But he's lived in Alexandria since 2014. He's a security expert. He has done a lot of work in security assessments and has done a lot of work in like figuring out what technologies are the best fit for doing security assessments. As many of you know, he ran for school board unsuccessfully, unfortunately, but he's sticking right in there. He's not going away. And I think that we're very lucky to have Mark still active in the community. He has worked at the State Department, where he focused on counterterrorism and security issues and other private sector organizations. He has a Bachelor of Arts in History from Cornell and has a Master of Arts in National Security from Georgetown. So, with that, I think we have a really awesome panel, and we're very lucky to have these folks here tonight. I also want to acknowledge some of the folks that are here that are both with the school system, and I think, Mac, maybe some of your folks are here as well. So very lucky to have several members of ACPS, and if you wouldn't mind just standing, and there's a lot of folks here that are very active on this very issue we're here tonight. So Dr. Julie Crawford, the Chief Student Officer. Thank you, Julie. Dr. Marsha Jackson, the Director of K-12 School Counseling. Sherry James. Is she here? Great. Yes. Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. And Greg Baldwin, School Climate and Culture Specialist. Thank you. It's so great to see all of you.
Jamie
Pardon? Who is it?
Jamie Bartlett.
Jamie Bartlett.
Director of Security.
Director of Security. There you are. Thank you. Did I miss anybody else?
Helen Lloyd.
Helen. Where's Helen? There you are. Hi, Helen. She's our Director of Communications. Thank you, Helen. Okay. Anyone else I missed? No? Good? Okay. All right. Also from the Mayor's Campaign to End Bullying, Mac, why don't you point out, because I have a list of folks that are here, but I don't think all of them are here, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. Like Michael Johnson, please stand.
All right. Hi, Michael.
Officer Benny Evans. And Michael Johnson is with the Recreation Department. Margaret Orlando, Recreation Department. Dr. Jackson, and of course Sherry James with ACPS.
Oh, great. Thank you. All right. Mark, is there anyone here with your company?
God, I hope not.
Okay. Okay. Well, great. I'm gonna sort of set the stage a little bit and just sort of set the tone for what we're about to talk about this evening. And let me just say a few words about this theme tonight. It's a very sensitive topic, right? And it's something that I think I can say for myself every day when I wake up and I go about my business, whether I'm taking my daughter to school or I'm driving around town. I'm always thinking about the safety of our schools, right? How many of you in the audience, and I know a lot of you are going to raise your hands in the way back, but how many of you are currently have, how many? First of all, raise your hands, how many of you are currently in school? 1, 2, 3. Okay, wonderful. How many of you right now have children in school? Thank you. How many of you had children that have graduated and have, with all the happy faces, right? So, listen, we're all part of this ecosystem. Our schools and our community, I feel, are all one giant ecosystem. And, as I was mentioning last summer when we sat down and kind of thought about what are some of the topics that we thought would be of interest, former Mayor Bill Ewell said, listen, we've really got to call more attention to the work that this city is doing to prevent bullying. And we all kind of shook our heads. We're like, yeah, we do. And we have to really think about and be grateful for the resources that we've put toward this area. And we're going to talk about that tonight. We've got, the right people up here, as you can see, to dive into it. But, when we were talking about it last summer, it wasn't too long after the very horrible, and there's been many horrible, shootings, right? And there was one particular one that we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary in Parkland, Florida. And it just was coincidental. I don't know how many of you saw the Washington Post today, but there was a story about Zachary Cruz. Have any of you guys see that story today? Yep. Zachary Cruz, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about it. I think it's really interesting how the timing of this. His brother was the shooter, and Zachary is serving probation right now. And it's a long story, but He is, I think, his half-brother, Nicholas Cruz's half-brother or stepbrother or something. He is serving probation here in Virginia, and I'll get to that in a minute. And maybe you saw the story, and I can quickly run through it. But Nicholas Cruz, of course, who is, was the perpetrator in that terrible shooting last February in Parkland. His brother Zachary has come out about what he thinks may have caused his brother's actions. And he feels as though it could have been to bullying. He bullied his brother. And so shortly after, and I don't know exactly the timeline, but he himself, Zachary, the brother, started an anti-bullying campaign in Florida, where they live. And I don't know exactly the timing, though, but apparently Zachary did something, and he apparently trespassed on the grounds of the school, of the Parkland school, and he was arrested. And I don't think he didn't feel he would have a fair, he would be fairly treated in Florida, so he is serving his probation in Stanton, Virginia. Okay, so there was a story today in the paper about this, and I just thought it was very timely because, here we are tonight, and one of the things that, I know we're going to dive into, and it's going to be on a question that I know I will have is, is there a correlation between bullying and unfortunate situations that happen like shootings? And, and that's one of the questions, and sort of and I don't want to say it's an hypothesis for tonight's discussion, but, I think that there are three major areas that I'd like for us to dive into, and I'm going to start asking questions, which is, one is I think that what we want to do tonight is to really understand sort of the safety of our city schools, right? Both public and private. And I know that Dr. Hutchings is here representing the city public schools, but let's talk about really our whole ecosystem, our whole community. Let's think about how do we ensure the safety of all of our schools, our whole ecosystem, and how do we keep our students and staff safe in uncertain times? So that's one kind of area or theme for tonight. The second is going back to this issue of bullying. Really, is there a correlation? And I think that there are some folks that feel like, there really isn't. And I want to push a little bit on that tonight. Clearly from the story that I know I read today in the paper, and how this brother has come out saying, I bullied my brother, and if I hadn't done that, maybe that wouldn't have happened. I knock on a leather couch right here, okay? But, we are very lucky here in Alexandria. We've been lucky, right? We haven't had anything like that happen, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that, which is hence, again, the reason why we have tonight's discussion is to dive into how strong we have built our community and why we have. And again, there's a lot of uncertain times, as we know, all over, and we read about it and see about it every day, but there's a lot of reasons why our community is safe. So another topic for tonight, another theme is sort of the effect of bullying on our school security. How do we manage bullying? How do we prevent and discourage it? I've got these 3 bracelets on here that I know that Mac brought, and I know Mac's going to talk a lot about the program that was put in place almost 5 years ago and all the supports that are in place. So the theme really is how do we prevent and discourage bullying? The third really area is how can students and people like us, parents, staff, how can they feel empowered and safe to identify and address threats? And I think there's a lot of programs that do exist in our city that are in place that we don't know about, which is why we want to talk about it tonight. So without further ado, let me jump into my first question. Dr. Hutchings, when you wake up every day and you send your own 2 kids to school, and I know you have 2 that are in the school system, and then you make your way, of course, to work, and you assume your role as the head of our school system. How do you know, and how can you feel that our schools are safe?
So I think that's a deep question, right? I think the one thing that's most important, let me just make this clear. I heard your comments earlier, and I think that no community really is immune to something tragic happening, right? And if there was a magic, formula that any community could use to prevent something like that, I think everyone would use it. They would put it in place, right? So some of the communities that have been impacted, they were very close-knit communities that were supportive of the schools and had practices in place for students as well. So I just want to make it clear to us that there is no one way to ensure that nothing like that could ever happen in a school. And I think that's probably why this is one of the toughest jobs for any educator, to be a superintendent, because you are vulnerable. I wish I could tell our community there is 100% guarantee that nothing will ever happen in Alexandria City Public Schools. But honestly, I cannot. And what I can tell people, though, and what I even feel for our own 2 children, because my wife, she helped make these babies, right? She reminds me all the time, you're not the only one. But the one thing that I can tell our community is that we do everything within our power to ensure that it doesn't happen in our schools, and we like to be proactive to make sure that we have the appropriate training for our staff in regards to having, whether it's some type of violent intruder in one of our schools or any type of situation where you have an unsafe environment around or within the school. And some of those things include, the social workers that we have working in our schools. The partnership that we have with the Alexandria Police Department, which is a very important collaboration for us. They help us with our security plans. Our Director of Safety and Security that we introduced earlier, Mr. James Bartlett, he's a former employee of the Alexandria Police Department, which is great for us to actually have retired police officers working in that capacity, as well as the police officers that we have in our schools. I think that when I wake up in the morning, I feel that our 2 biological children are safe as they can be, as well as the other 16,000 kids that we have in our schools. I feel that they're safe because we do have proactive measures, and we do have plans that not only are we required by the state to have safety plans in place, but we also practice our drills and we revise and refine our drills, especially when we have situations like most recently with a threat at Francis C. Hammond Middle School a couple of weeks ago, which was a very scary situation. Now, it ended up being, a random threat from, most likely a prank. It was not a real situation, but we had to react and respond as if it was. And one thing that we are adamant about in Alexandria City Public Schools, whether it is, a joke or a prank, we're going to respond as if it is a reality. And we want to make sure that we take matters like this very seriously. And the more we educate not only our staff, but also our students and their families around safety precautions and safety measures in our buildings, the better off we're going to be.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Mac, your experience helping former Mayor Bill Ewell start, and you're still, I know, serving and active on the anti-bullying campaign. We're getting into our 5th year now, right, in the city?
That's correct.
What changes have you seen that give you more assurance that the programs are working, and what things do you think still need to be addressed?
Well, in 2014, when Mayor Ewell attended the U.S. Conference of Mayors, he came back with the idea of creating this campaign here in the city. And with his help and help from members of the Recreation Department, ACPS, Court Services, Police Department, Sheriff's Department, Partnership for Healthier Alexandria, and many other agencies in the city, the committee was formed. And through the work of the staff and community citizens that also are on that committee, and we've had youth on that committee also working, on that committee. But through their work, we've all said that bullying is a community issue. It's not a school issue. It's not a recreation department issue. It's not an issue that's in one location. It's a community issue. And we feel that working together to educate and talk about bullying on a regular basis, not just something that you do at the beginning of the school year or it's something that you do at once at the recreation department centers. We do this on a regular basis. The school system does it on a regular basis. And many of their programs are centered around bullying themes, and same with the recreation department and our other city agencies. So what we have tried to do over the last 5 years is get the information out, get people to talk. And a lot of times, that's part of the problem. They don't talk. And get people to recognize and respect each other and realize that we have disagreements. We don't all look alike, but you respect each other. And so through the hard work of our committee and the different agencies here in the city, we have, I feel like we've made a dent in trying to get the message out and get people to talk and about bullying and the effects. You know, bullying is not just a child issue. Bullying is an adult issue too. And we've run into cases, and Michael Johnson, who is our community outreach coordinator for the Recreation Department, runs the Safe Place program, and that's a youth in crisis hotline where any child 18 years and below, and we've dealt with some that are older, if they're in crisis, no matter what the crisis may be, we don't question what that crisis is. We get them immediate help and let the professional people deal with that. We've dealt with situations with bullying. We've dealt with situations with suicide. We've dealt with situations when, abuse. And so it's a 24-hour hotline and on and on and on. Again, this is such a good committee of folks that work very hard to make sure that throughout the school system, throughout the recreation department and all the different agencies, this information is readily talked about. And I believe that we have made some good inroads in it, in that. Yep. And talking with kids, they want to talk. And we have to be the listen. And sometimes that's hard for us adults to listen, but we have to listen to what they're saying.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So, Mark, as a certified protection professional and, someone who has worked in security and analyzing threats and doing assessments, how much do you see bullying as a threat? And I know, let's talk about, we could talk about nationwide, but let's talk really about here in Alexandria. I know you've got a lot of expertise in this area. You campaigned on it. You, really talked a lot about how we need to keep our children safe. It doesn't necessarily require more guns. It doesn't necessarily require arming teachers or anyone. We need good security policies in place to make sure that objective facts, not subjective biases, are informing decisions on school suspensions, for example, and things like that. So if you were to, first of all, I would love for you to hear your opinion, and I think I kind of know a little bit about it already. Share with us sort of your opinion on the relationship, if you will, between bullying and our school security. And then my follow-up question would be is if you were to kind of grade the safety of our schools, what grade would you give it?
Okay, there we go. Hey, well, thank you for that introduction. I will go on a limb and say there a specific aspect of violence that we're here to talk about. I think is mass shootings, and we added that element to the story. As far as that type of violence and bullying goes, there's about a 0.0 correlation between the two. School shooters typically come in, mass shooters, I should say, typically come in 3 different types. You have your this is all from a book, a very good book called Why Kids Kill. You typically have your psychopaths who tend to have kind of things that are similar to serial killers. No empathy, complete lack of empathy. You have your psychotic, which are folks that, you know, maybe they were hearing voices and the voices told them to do something. So we're talking about extreme mental psychosis. And then your third element are typically traumatized folks. And sometimes bullying falls into there. But if you look at something like Columbine, for instance, one shooter was somebody who would be typically classified as a bully. He bullied people. And the other was a bullied person. I mean, something like 60%, 70%, I don't know the numbers. You might. How many people claim to be bullied? Everybody. Not everybody becomes a school shooter at all, by any means. The only positive correlation we have between school shootings and any other aspect is, 1, they have a gun if they're a school shooter by definition, and 2, 95 to 96% of the time they're male. We do have a few female. Other than that, there is little to no correlation with race, income, any other statistic. That's really all we have to go on. It's similar to in the corporate world where I work, where we deal with workplace violence. We have a similar lack of a profile. And so really what we need to rely on is actually similar programs to what you do with bullying, because the things that people call crisis lines with, suicidal behavior, that can potentially be linked. Not saying everybody with suicide is, but Nicholas Cruz is a great example. The Parkland shooter, he tried to commit suicide twice before he was killed. So having an expert come in and be able to intervene and to determine what is causing this problem is one thing that we can do to keep schools safe, and I think Alexandria does a great job of that. As far as a grade, I wouldn't be prepared to give a grade on how well Alexandria does keeping kids safe. I'll send my kid there. My kid's in preschool right now. I'd send my kid to a school in Alexandria without a second thought to safety. At the end of the day, it's a risk assessment, and that's exactly what Dr. Hutchings was saying. We cannot guarantee 100% safety, but you guys didn't have 100% safety driving here. We all calculate what the risk is based on what we know and what we think we know, and then we make a decision based on that. There are things that we always can do to improve safety, but there's a limit to, I think, what people will expect. I mean, we could shut down ACPS tomorrow, have everybody do online learning. 0 school shootings that way. But is that worth it? Probably not, given the risk involved. So happy to talk more about kind of, what are some of the threats out there, how we can solve it. But the prime question, little to no linkage whatsoever between bullying and school shooting. I want to make that clear, at least in my opinion.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Okay. So a couple of things. First of all, I want to make sure everyone knows there are little yellow sticky or pink and yellow notepads on your tables. Please feel free to jot down a question and bring it up to me, or just wave somebody and they'll bring it up. We have a lot of questions already, so I'm going to dive right into some of them. I had some other questions planned, but I want to get to. I always hate when I go to these things and I ask a question and nobody answers it, so I'm going to dive right in. Okay. First question. I just want to be very mindful of the first one. Not this is the first, this is one of them. Why aren't there any students on the panel? That's a great question. And in hindsight, that would have been a really awesome addition. And thank you for that question. I think we should have had a student on the panel to give that perspective of someone who we're talking about right here. So, mea culpa. Next time, we'll make sure we have one. And if there's a student out there who wants to, speak up and say something, please don't be bashful.
You can use my mic.
You can use our mics, seriously. Okay, I'm going to dive into another question here. Mac, what surprised you most when you started this work on anti-bullying in the city?
I think the thing that surprised us the most is that certain aspects didn't want to talk about it, and that that it was looked at that, oh, bullying is a youth issue. It's primarily a school issue, and that's not the case at all. And you know, there's cases that we have run into where children are bullied at home. They're actually bullying the grandparent, and that happens. So I think educating, getting more education out to folks, I think not realizing that people didn't know as much about bullying or they had a stigma about it than they do. And what we've tried to do is to, like a ball, it's round, and you see all sides of it and the effects, not only to the child, but to the family, to the parents, to the child that got bullied and the child that bullied. And there is a correlation. And so that, I think that's what surprised us the most. And what pleasantly surprised us the most was how willing our agencies in the city jumped in on this and was in full support of working together.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go
I
ahead.
just wanted to make one quick point, and that is there's a very distinct difference between bullying and active shooting, right? And I know that, you know, Mark touched on this as well. And the point that I want to make is, you know, with the active shooting piece, we have to keep in mind that getting guns off the streets is what's going to help us alleviate some of these mass shootings that's happening. And that's something that I, as a superintendent, do not have control over. We are going to have to make that difference as Americans across this country. When are we going to say enough is enough, right? In regards to bullying, we've had bullying for years, right? When I was growing up, I remember being bullied, right? Some of them happen to be ACPS employees now. Thank God I have a forgiving heart. Thank God
He's
I have
coming
a
for you.
forgiving heart, everybody. I got over it. I'm done. But during my generation and my time, even though bullying still existed, we didn't have mass shootings in schools, right? So that gives us some data to show there is no correlation between bullying and doing things like active shooting. There are other things that students are engaged in, such as these violent games and television and movies and screen time, you know, at home, depending on what they're using that screen time for. There is research out there that says kids who could be in a home that's loving, caring, nurturing, two parents, them having access to certain video games, movies, the internet, and certain things on the internet could have the same impact as a student being in a home that's abusive and violent and, you know, parents are not together. So I think it's important for us, you know, as parents, to also make sure that we're monitoring what our kids are doing within the household. So there's a parent component to that too. And I'm not putting this all on parents either and saying if your child has done something, that's the parent's fault. I want to make that clear because I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that there's another component to that. And within ACPS, one thing that we are striving to do is how can we be proactive and make sure that kids are in a nurturing and caring environment, that kids are trained to know how to deal with their anger and their issues, whether it's working with our social workers or our psychologists or our counselors that we have within our schools, our teachers being trained on harassment training and knowing how to identify if a student is being harassed, or how to respond if a student shares a particular situation with you. How do you react and respond to that? And those are measures that we're taking into consideration, that we're putting into practice so that we can prevent some of those negative outcomes that come from the bullying. So I just wanted to make those two major points, that bullying and the active shooting, two totally different, you know, topics.
Right.
But there are some situations where a person who was an active shooter said they were bullied at some point.
Right.
You know, we've had some people state that, but I don't think that's the sole reason. Some other factors to that.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Got some great questions here, and some of them are related. So I'm going to try to combine a few of them, just for all of you who have asked the questions. Thank you, thank you. So, Mark, we have armed school resource officers in our high school and our middle schools. Do they make our schools any safer? And that was directed to you, Mark, by the way.
Oh, I'm not running for office anymore. So it depends on what you are saying they are safer from. And I think that's another problem that we sometimes have, is that the realm of security and violence, there's a huge spectrum with Parkland on one side and to some extent bullying as a manifestation of violence on the other side. I do think that school resource officers have and serve an important function as far as building rapport and presenting hopefully a positive role model police to kids today. As far as a school resource officer as an active shooter response, so this particular instance, no, absolutely not. There's no correlation between a school resource officer being present and a active shooting incident in a school ending. It typically ends when large amounts of law enforcement come on scene, usually in about 4 to 10 minutes is how long it lasts. There have been instances where school resource officers have been that law enforcement presence that has ended a school shooting, but more often than not, it's your SWAT team, or in fact, nobody. The person just goes into a room and kills himself or something like that because they're afraid or they hear sirens. So if you're looking to stop active shooters or reduce the risk of active shooters, I should say, in our schools, school resource officers aren't the way to go. I would say what is effective is a quicker response, the quickest response time you can have from a team of trained professionals that this is their only essentially job is to end this type of situation, your SWAT personnel. Alexandria has some great people. If you went to the Touch a Truck event, anybody have young kids and go to the Touch a Truck event?
What was it again?
Touch a Truck, where you can go touch a truck.
Oh, touch a truck.
Yeah, the Alexandria Rapid Reaction Police are there, and they're awesome. They train on this, and not just at schools, at a mall, at an office, at a government location. It's a very similar tactic that they're using in every place. So this is their job. That's what they do. The important thing is to get them on scene as quickly as possible. So the quicker you can have them, that's why I'm encouraged that Alexandria, we do something called a warm call, which is one tactic we've seen is that school shooters potentially pull a fire alarm and then begin shooting. This is something that a couple have done, which leads to problems because you have everybody leave and exit the halls and they don't do their lockdown drill or their ALICE training, they do their fire drill training, which is get out of the building, and they take advantage of that. So one thing that a lot of districts across the nation have been doing has been if a fire alarm is pulled or a fire responds anywhere, they have police respond as well. They did, and they immediately begin covering the area and send people in to come rescue folks, EMTs to come rescue folks, even though the area is not cleared. This worked really well in Parkland, and it's something that our folks train on here too. I'm sorry, not Parkland, Las Vegas.
Okay, thank you. All right. I'm just going to, there's I'm trying to organize the questions. There are a lot of really, really good ones. I'm just going to ask another one. So we had a mass shooting, as a lot of us remember, at a ball field next to GW Middle School. How was GW alerted and protected? Dr. Hutchings, do you want to address that, or that was right?
So I think Mr. Bartlett, I mean, because I wasn't here at that time. I got to read in the newspaper like everybody else
That's
here.
right, you weren't here. That's right.
But
That's right.
was that when school was in session? I don't think school was in session during that time.
It was actually at Simpson Park.
So Simpson Park, yeah. So typically what happens anytime there is any type of safety concern or issue outside of the school, what we do is we ensure that the building is secured, meaning no one can come inside of the school and no one can leave the school. We have great communication with our Alexandria Police Department, so the moment there is a situation, particularly that's happening around a school, especially since many of our schools have resource officers, we are informed almost immediately because they also have the same walkie-talkies that go out when we have a resource officer. So we're able to go into securing the building when we have situations like that.
Thank you.
And also I'd like to say too, something that happens like that, our department works closely with the school system on shutdowns or lockdowns. In that particular case, our recreation centers that were closest to Simpson Park were on lockdown also. And so there is a communication that goes out between the city and the schools throughout the city for certain locations where like the recreation department centers and things like that.
Okay. All right, I have a couple questions regarding laws and legislation, so I'm going to try to combine them. There's legislation in Richmond to require schools to give advance notice of security or lockdown drills. What is your opinion? And the second follow-up question is, do you all support red flag laws? If so, please explain why. I do not know what red flag laws are. Maybe someone on the panel does, but if any of you want to comment on either of these questions. Go ahead.
Sure. So red flag laws, I'm thinking of the same law. Those are laws that will allow you to say, put a check next to a person's name in their universal record. So when you go do a background check or something, they'll pop up and say this person should not have a firearm, and they can be court imposed based on kind of a risk matrix and a risk assessment. I am in favor of them. If you look at our current school risk assessment procedures, there's, I might be dating, how many people know South Park? Did anybody watch South Park in here, or is this the wrong audience? Okay. The underwear gnomes theory of school security, which is, okay, you do this, and then question mark, and then step 3 is safety. We kind of have that in place right now. If you look at specifically the laws in place in Virginia, where you're supposed to do an in-depth risk assessment for folks that get reported to you. Right, so they display some troubling behavior. So you have a certified professional sit down and look through the behavior to make sure it's, they're having a bad day versus there could be some psychopathic behavior there. Right. If they come into that section, you're supposed to monitor them. You're supposed to say this person could be and take further action from the school perspective or whatever perspective. But in particular, in this case, school perspective, there's very little recourse to prevent them from getting a weapon at that point, especially in Virginia. A red flag law, considering how easy it is for folks to buy guns off the internet, probably wouldn't be the greatest thing. Now, I mean, it's certainly a step forward for Virginia, but right now, if you have a Virginia ID, you can really just go buy a gun in a parking lot here. So a red flag law would be useful, especially if people are buying them as they should be. But there are still giant holes in the system that I think would need to be addressed.
All right, let me get through another question. It's a show of hands. Just raise your hand if you agree, and if you don't have to raise your hand. Should schools have metal detectors? Oh, okay, well, there goes that question.
It depends.
Oh, okay, thank you, Mark. Okay, go ahead, please.
I mean, everything you do is risk-based. So if you have a particular threat, for instance, someday when I'm developing programs in the corporate world, for instance, I like to have a variable actions that you can do. So your standard should be probably no metal detectors. But if we get a threat coming in saying, hey, somebody's bringing in a gun today, there's a couple different things you can do. One thing you could do is have a metal detector. Right. So I wouldn't rule them out under all circumstances, but in general, operating, no, they're not useful.
All right, we're going to get back to sort of the bullying issue as well. I have a bunch of related questions, and I think, Mac, you kind of addressed it, but maybe just for everyone's benefit, again, if you could just sort of help define what constitutes bullying. How is it defined and understood, most importantly, by students? That's one question. Another question is there a correlation between bullying and suicide? I think you talked about that, but you may want to just address that again. And how are restorative practices and harm circles, I'm not familiar with that term, but maybe you are, Mac, be made part of anti-bullying? So those are 3 questions. I could have kept on going, but I'll just get those three down.
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you, Mac.
You know, we break it down very simply when we're out talking with kids. So usually, teasing is something that's done once. Bullying is something that's done over a period of time, over and over and over again. Okay, it doesn't have to be the same thing, but they're constantly. So that's how you kind of look at it. And but what we also talk about to the kids, and I'm very thankful that our department, the Recreation Department, adopted the restorative practices that ACPS has put in, and honestly, when we did that, the purpose is that we wanted to make sure that the department personnel is talking the same thing that the school personnel, because we're the ones that see the kids more than the parents do at times. And so when there is conflict resolution, we're talking the same thing that the school system. So if a child gets in trouble at a recreation center and they're maybe getting in trouble at school, we're talking the same thing. And so we want kids to feel like they can come to anybody and talk. And a lot of times they can't. One of the things that we did with the Safe Place program was we trained a group of about 12 to 14 students at T.C. Williams High School 2 years ago to be liaisons between students that don't feel that they can go and talk to a teacher, a counselor, a principal, a parent, that they can talk to one of their peers about an issue, such as bullying. And that was the first time. Safe Place is a national program. Alexandria was the first to do that in the country. And now other Safe Place locations throughout the country are now doing that. And we'll be doing that more. But, again, it's about communication. And it's about sitting down, letting the kids talk. Not us telling them what they need to, but listening to them and letting them work it out, figure out how they can resolve a conflict in a setting that's not threatening, that they're equal. Doesn't mean that you're still not going to deal with the person that that's causing the issue, but I think, did I answer everything?
Good. That's good. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in addition to what Mac has stated, I think that one of the key drivers to maybe eliminate bullying is building relationships with our kids, and that is, staff, adults, building relationships with our kids, because then you can understand if a student is showing, a different behavior in class because you're paying attention to, how they enter the classroom or how they're interacting with their peers, and you can possibly see some signs of bullying. I wanted to touch on the restorative practices piece because it's an area that is very important to Alexandria City Public Schools. I mean, it's so important to us that now we have a coordinator for restorative practice who happens to be here
define what it is just
today, Mr. Greg Baldwin. If you can just wave for a second, the other guy with the bow tie, the other Greg with the bow tie. So restorative practices is it's a practice for us to be able to build and rebuild relationships with students. The purpose in restorative practices is so that you are finding a way to help the student not engage in that particular behavior again in the future, and you prevent that by talking through situations and how you could better make better choices or better decisions in the future. One practice that we're doing, and we actually did it this summer with our Leadership Institute, so all of our instructional leaders, we did a community circle. And you would think that we had Dr. Phil or Oprah at our Leadership Institute, because what we learned about individual people just from this community circle, and we were talking about like what has impacted your life or why, your why, compelling why. why we got into this work and that type of thing. Literally, I know in my circle, there were tears. People were, I mean, we were just passing, you pass, I forgot what we were passing around, but it's like it's like a object to give you the option to be able to speak, right? So everybody gets an opportunity to speak around the room. But that was very impactful just for adults to be able to talk about why they're in this field of education. And people shared things about them that I never knew. You wouldn't know by looking at someone, right? And it was so powerful for our adults at our Leadership Institute that we began to say we have to make a vow for every student to be able to engage in things like community circles, and restorative practices has to be something that is in all of our schools throughout Alexandria City Public Schools, because it's all about relationships and building those relationships with our kids.
Great. Thank you. Just a couple questions, and I want to be mindful of the time too. I know we try to wind this down by 8:30. I just want to be, respectful of everyone's time. So I'm going to get to the last couple of questions here, and of course we can keep going if you want to keep going, but I also just want to be respectful of everyone's time. So school safety is so much broader than physical safety. What is ACPS doing to provide emotionally safe schools for our students? It's a great question. And how does ALICE, A-L-I-C-E, the acronym, help keep schools safer? There was previous lockdown strategies, I think was the question here. How does it keep schools safer than previous lockdown strategies? So Dr. Hutchings, you might want to address these.
So the first question was about what we're doing to help with the social and emotional needs of kids, right? That's how I interpreted it. Okay.
Yes.
So
emotionally
yes.
safe.
So one thing that I stated earlier today is that we have social workers in our schools. We have psychologists, 21 psychologists throughout our entire school division. We have counselors in all of our buildings. That's elementary, middle, and high school, which is really unheard of in some school divisions across this country. We value the fact that students need an adult that they can speak to. We also value the fact that we want to make sure that our staff, as I spoke about earlier with the harassment training, that they're trained so they can understand how to help students who are in need and how to identify some of the triggers or students who are experiencing some type of trauma. And trauma-informed instruction is another, I guess, buzzword that's going around now in the educational world, because a lot of our kids are experiencing trauma. I mean, think of just the past few weeks with the furlough, right? That could be a traumatic experience for someone a child that was accustomed to having everything that they needed and seeing their parent or parents leave to go to work each day, and now the parent is at home or the parent is suffering some type of depression because of what has occurred. It has an impact on our kids, which leads to them bringing that to school, right? When we build relationships with young people, the adults in the school are then able to identify there is something going on with that particular child. And those are some of the things that we've put in place. One other thing that I think is very important, and this is something that's new, it's called Securely, and it's a parent portal, Securely, S-E-C-U-R-L-Y. L-E-Y? Is it L-Y? No, L-Y. Securely. And this is a parent portal where, our students have Chromebooks. Our students also have access to the internet. If you don't have the internet service at home, we have these things called Kajits, which is a portable internet service. So if your parents don't have internet, you can still have internet and use your Chromebook at home. And Alexandria City Public Schools provides that to our students, especially those who are in need. Well, Securely, it provides us with alerts. If a student was to do a Google search that says suicide, or if a student did a Google search that said bombing or shooting or harm myself or cutting, all of those keywords go to an actual we have a system where people are looking at these keywords, and it is instantly reported. And then it goes to our chief student services department, really our chief student services officer, and that information is actually given to parents, especially emergencies. We have had already this year several situations where we literally one time on a weekend, we responded to some key words that were put into a Google search, and a child was actually having a suicidal moment at home. And fortunately, our team sent the police to that home, and it prevented that. That was this year. So these are measures that we have put in place just to make sure that we have those additional eyes, because as parents, you know, I signed up for security. I was in the pilot group. I said, put my daughter on that, you know, because I want to know as a parent, you can't help your child if you don't know that there are particular situations that they're experiencing. And what we're trying to do is be that additional kind of support for not only our kids, but also for our parents.
You didn't, if you could just briefly mention and talk about the ALICE program. That's okay. That's
Got
okay.
it. So excited about the socio-emotional,
that's okay.
social-emotional
No.
things.
That's fine.
But ALICE training, and the acronym is ALERT. I don't want to get it wrong. But ALICE, I know it's ALERT. It starts with ALERT. ALICE, ALICE. It's an acronym. I was able to participate in ALICE training as well a few years ago. But the reason why we adopted ALICE practices within our schools is because we wanted to provide our staff as well as our students with other ways to react and respond to a active shooter in a school. We hope that we are never in a situation like that, but research has shown that the former lockdown drills of turning the lights off, hiding in the closet, or going against the wall, and being extremely vulnerable, right, puts students and our staff in harm. If there's an active shooter in the building, your goal is you want to try to get out of the place, right? Or you want to try to prevent somebody from coming into your space or coming into your room, or responding or reacting to a situation like that. So we adopted those practices. We don't classify ourselves as an ALICE school division, but we have adopted ALICE practices in our safety and security drills just to provide some additional supports for our staff and our students to respond if there's ever an active shooter in our schools.
And Eileen, I'd
Yes,
like
please,
to
Mac.
also say that in the recreation centers, they're soon to be doing active shooter training too, and our staff have been trained. So, as you see, you know, ACPS and recreation, which we deal with the most kids here in the city, we try and mirror a lot of things that we do between each other, so kids can feel that safety net between the two.
So maybe we'll have some points of disagreement up here finally. I'm actually not a fan of ALICE training in our schools. A couple different reasons. One, anybody that says that there's a specific evidence-based active shooter drill out there, they're selling you not much. There's very little research about any sort of active shooter drill as far as safety or not safety. When I design active shooter prevention programs in the corporate world, believe it or not, the corporate world, we prefer free. So ALICE, there's
What do
a
you
cost.
mean by free?
Free, as in it doesn't cost anything. You develop it in-house. ALICE has a cost to it. You have to pay for training. It's a for-profit company. So you do have to pay for it. There has been some research done, and it's kind of biased research, so take this with a grain of salt. But one of the problems I have with ALICE training is that the outcome of it, typically for students and perhaps sometimes teachers as well, is that the first thing your mind goes to is the fighting and disarming techniques that you learned. In any sort of weapon situation. So you see a weapon, and you immediately try to fight that person rather than the things that are typically better, which is running or hiding. The problem is if to a hammer, to a nail, right? Everything's a hammer or something like that. If your reaction to every time you see a weapon is you have to go fight that person, sometimes you have the opposite reaction of what you're looking for in a school environment. So, for instance, I don't know if you can share numbers or anything like that, but most of the weapons that come into school aren't there for a mass shooting incident. Would you say that's fair to say from a school perspective? people that are in the schools often, you probably see a lot more weapons that come into school than that actually turn into violent incidents. The problem with Alice sometimes, at least according to 1 or 2 studies, is that if you see a weapon and you automatically attack that person or attempt to disarm them or something, the situation can turn more violent than it would have been if you'd have tried a different technique. So typically we still teach run, hide, fight. That's what I do in the corporate world. It's a free DHS program, so I don't have to ask my boss for more money for it. It's just as effective, but I tend to really focus on that running and hiding because statistically that will improve. That's what we do have research on. Running and hiding, getting away from the problem is the #1 thing you can do. The fighting is only a last resort, and if you focus on, oftentimes in these programs that have it as a large component, it becomes the main resort in people's minds.
So I just want to make it clear that Alice is not for us to tell. We're not telling kids to go and attack an intruder who comes into the building. So I want to make it clear that we have adopted Alice practices. We are not an Alice school division, meaning that we don't follow all of Alice's philosophy and practices, but we have adopted some of those to incorporate into our safety and security measures. And the #1 thing that we talk about when we're doing our Alice training is that it's important for people to try to get away, especially if you can. I mean, that we wouldn't tell any staff member or student to go head on with somebody with a gun. Right? That is not, they're not trained police officers. I don't even think police officers do that. Maybe you do, I don't know. I'm not in your, I have been trained, I haven't gone to the police academy, but that is not a tactic or strategy that we're endorsing or even providing students with training on. Another thing that we are making sure that we do with some of the Alice practices that we've adopted is that we're making them age appropriate, because something you might do with a kindergartner is not the same thing you would do with someone who's a senior in high school, right? So we're making sure that we're giving people what I like to call life skills, because, you know, our kids, I have 2 biological children in the schools as well, that came home and talked to me about some of the Alice training, because we did not have this in my former school division where I was superintendent previously. And what I shared with them was that some of these are just life skills for us to not only think about in school, but active shooting can happen in a mall, in a store, walking down the street, in a movie theater. I mean, it's happened in so many other places outside of the school that I want, you know, my biological children to also be able to just know how to react and respond, so that you're not just standing and looking, waiting for somebody to attack you or for you to be harmed. We want you to find some way to react. And it's just giving you some options. It's not telling anybody this is the only way to do it. We're not telling anybody that because we've adopted some of these Alice practices that now our schools are immune to any type of active shooter coming into our buildings. And we're definitely not telling our kids to attack somebody with a weapon in our schools, and I can guarantee that.
All right. By the way, thank you, Bob, just because we couldn't remember what the actual ALICE acronym is. It's Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, Evacuate. Just so everybody knows, that's what it stands for. Okay, I know we're way past our time here, and I also want to be mindful not only of all of us that need to get home probably and get you know, ready for work tomorrow, but we also have students here who have to get ready for school. So I want to be very mindful. I'm going to have a final question, and it's not really, it's more of an opinion than it is, of course, probably more of a fact, if you will. But I think it's a question that I know it's been on my mind, and I know it's been on a lot of yours. So there's a lot of similar questions. So how do we teach children not to bully when they're active bullies in leadership roles? And as a lot of us know, for those young bullies sometimes become older bullies. And sometimes that character trait doesn't really ever go away. So let me do a quick fire round here of answers. Let me start with Mark. Get your opinion on this. How do we teach children not to bully when we have bullies in leadership roles in our country and in our community? Maybe in our community. Not our community, in our country. Sorry. Saying
I will say that
politically.
regardless of your opinion of who the president is or what, if he's a bully, there have been bullies in leadership roles throughout history. And there's probably bullies in our community. Nobody here. But, I mean, I do what I do with my 3-year-old is I lead by example. And you always teach them to be the better person and find find allies. I think that's what I would teach my 3-year-old. And, you know, regardless of who's president, it will continue to be a lesson that you should always teach your 3-year-old.
Go ahead, Mac.
I think it's very simple, is that it's, again, building relationships, communication, and when someone sees something, say something. You know, don't be afraid to say something when you see it. And, you know, it's also treating people with respect, teaching your kids how to treat people with respect, but also it's the parents teaching, parents learning respect for others too, because kids emulate what they see. So again, it's communication and building positive relationships, and that's done daily, not just once a week or once a month. It's talked daily.
And I would say all those things, as well as, you know, just teaching our young people to accept people for who they are. And, you know, if we become an accepting, whether it's country or just an accepting world, right, we could all be, you know, in a better place. It's about, you know, knowing that we all have differences, we all have different opinions, we all have different perspectives, and just respecting that. And, you know, I always tell people, I'm fine with people disagreeing with me. I'm not going to try to argue with somebody because they disagree, because that's their opinion and that's their belief, right? What I have to do sometimes is to seek to try to understand where they're coming from. And if we spend just a little more time seeking to understand, we really won't have that time to be retaliatory or, you know, fighting back, because we're seeking to understand their point of view. And we can learn something, I think, you know, from that.
Sir, tell me your name again. Tom. Thank you, Tom. You were a young child during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and you were saying that when you were living in California, that there were a lot of drills to prepare for a potential threat and or a crisis. And you were asking, what is the impact psychologically on children preparing for these kinds of drills? Is that the essence of your question?
Specifically now about shooter drills.
Shooter drills. Thank you.
You know, I think that, one, it's a really good question. Two, I think that it's important for us to have the education in our schools as well. And that's from a psychology perspective, a social worker perspective, a counseling perspective, so that we are not making our students fearful of coming to school. This is the sad thing, and this is what I find sad, so I'm just speaking personally. Many of our children expect violence today. It's sad, but it's very true. We have made some of our young people, in some ways, immune to just thinking that something is horrible. When you know, like, I'm thinking of how I would be as a child going through something like that. Some of the drills that we do today, even saying the word active shooter, because that wasn't a term that was in my vocabulary when I was growing up. I wouldn't be able to really understand that. The unfortunate thing is that today, a lot of our young people, this is kind of the norm to have these types of discussions around the violence piece. That is why we're seeing, I believe, this is me speaking personally once again, I think that's why we're seeing many of our students, and not from the drills, but in regards to the violence across this world, we're seeing more students having these traumatic experiences that are unrelated to what we used to call trauma, like a child being abused sexually, physically, mentally. It's now trauma from violence, whether it's the media, whether it's television. I mean, if you think of just today's time, when we look at the news, very different from what the news used to look like when I was growing up. You know, now you see people being killed on the news. That didn't happen it wasn't on the news. We didn't see it. We couldn't see somebody being shot and killed, and then they make it go black after the person's laying on the ground. You just don't see the blood. You can see that on the news now, which is very scary. We didn't see on regular television some of the violence that's on Channel 4, Channel 5, just regular TV. It's not cable, right? For my generation, we had to have HBO, Cinemax, or Showtime to see things like that. And the exposure that we're giving to our young people in regards to violence, I feel that we do have to, as adults, try to shelter them in some ways so that they don't think that this is normal, because it's not.
Well, go ahead, Mark. One last, the final comment, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm happy to talk about that after. It's something I've thought a lot about because my profession obviously is contingent upon people being scared of things. That's what security is. We try to fix things that people are scared of in many instances. It's interesting to me that we don't see similar backlash against, say, fire drills or earthquake drills. People are scared of them, but I think it's because it's not wrapped up in politics, and a lot of those aren't necessarily human agency. And because there seems to be a bit of human agency behind the active shooter phenomenon, it certainly does cause people to be more worried. I don't think, personally, that images of violence or violent video games or anything like that is the cause of increased mass shootings, because they have been around. What I think has changed is people's ability to access niche environments where those actions are appreciated. If you look at Nicholas Cruz, I'm saying his name, right? This idiot who killed kids is now being talked about in Alexandria when we don't know anybody else's name, right? I can't tell you some of the victims' names. I know his name. And he made it in his video, right? He's clearly has psychological issues. But if you look at his video, he says, I'm going to be the next school shooter. I'm going to be famous. You're all going to remember my name. And we've reached a point in our information society where it's inevitable that these people's names will be remembered, and we can't put that genie back in the bottle. So we have to think of other ways to deal with it rather than just say, everybody stop talking about violence for the next 10 years, because it won't happen, because human beings are interested in it.
Thank you, Mark. Well, listen, I don't want to end on that kind of note, but that's okay. But listen, I just want to say, first of all, I think that this was a really good and honest and open discussions. I want to thank everyone for their questions. I got to almost everyone's questions. And just to say, once again, thank you to all of you who work on our behalves around the community to keep us safe, because we really owe you a huge gratitude. So thank you to our panelists, Dr. Hutchings, Max Louver, Mark Sullivan. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you for being here. And thanks for come to our next event.